humiliated and ejected like a trespasser from her paid-for first-class seat. Witness the shocking injustice faced by Dr. Amara Johnson, a respected black professor, when a hostile flight attendant and entitled passenger refused to believe she belonged, culminating in her removal by security as others watched in silence. Captured on video and ignited by fury, one call to her mentor sparks a national firestorm. Will this viral moment force a powerful airline CEO to confront the ugly truth of systemic bias and finally see the people his company harms? Atlanta to Chicago Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport. The hum of Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport was a familiar symphony to Dr. Amara Johnson, a chaotic masterpiece of rolling suitcases, echoing announcements, and the low thrum of anticipation. Exhaustion clung to her like the humid Atlanta air she'd just escaped, a residue from 3 days of intense intellectual combat at the National Conference on Systemic Racism and Social Equity. At 34, Amara, a sociology professor at the University of Chicago, carried the weight of her work not just in her mind, but in the slight slump of her shoulders, the weary lines around her sharp, intelligent eyes. Yet, beneath the fatigue, a quiet satisfaction simmered. She had delivered a keynote that sparked debate, challenged assumptions, and, she hoped, planted seeds of change. Now, all she craved was the relative peace of the flight home, the anonymous comfort of altitude and distance. Her reward to herself, booked months in advance using carefully saved points and a conference travel stipend, was Seat 2A on Skyhigh Airlines Flight 1107 to Chicago O'Hare. First class. A small pocket of temporary privilege, a space where she could decompress, maybe even grade a few papers without her elbow bumping a stranger's. Boarding pass clutched in her hand, Amara navigated the bustling B concourse. The priority boarding call for first-class passengers echoed, a summons she answered with a weary gratitude. She presented her pass to the gate agent, received a perfunctory nod, and walked down the jet bridge, the scent of recirculated air and faint disinfectant filling her nostrils. Stepping onto the plane felt like crossing a threshold into a different climate. Cooler air, plush carpeting, the subtle scent of leather. She located 2A, a spacious window seat, and slid her worn leather briefcase under the seat in front of her. Then placed her carry-on roller bag into the overhead bin. Settling into the wide, cushioned seat, she let out a long, slow breath, the tension in her neck easing fractionally. She gazed out the window at the ballet of ground crew vehicles, a world away from the academic battles she'd just fought. "Excuse me." The voice was sharp, laced with an unmistakable edge of entitlement. Amara turned. Standing in the aisle was a man in his late 50s, perhaps early 60s, his face florid, his expensive-looking polo shirt stretched taut over a considerable belly. His eyes, pale blue and narrowed, swept over her, taking in her Senegalese twists, her simple but professional navy sheath dress, her dark skin. His gaze lingered, dismissive, appraising. This was Brad Whitaker, though Amara didn't know his name yet, she only knew the archetype. "I think you're in my seat," he stated, not asked. He held up his own boarding pass, jabbing a thick finger towards the seat number. 2A. Amara offered a polite, tired smile. "I believe this is 2A. Perhaps there's a mix-up? My boarding pass confirms it." She reached into her tote bag for her pass. "There's no mix-up," Whitaker snapped, his voice rising slightly, drawing the attention of the few other passengers already settled nearby. "This is my seat. I always sit in 2A. The assumption hung heavy in the air. "Someone like you wouldn't be in a seat like this. Someone like me belongs here." It was a microaggression Amara had encountered countless times in countless variations, but the blatantness of it, here, in this space she'd specifically chosen for respite, felt like a physical blow. "Sir, I assure you, my boarding pass says 2A, Amara repeated, keeping her voice steady, professional. She held up her pass clearly. "Perhaps you could check with the flight attendant?" A flight attendant, hearing the raised voices, bustled over. Brenda Lowell was perhaps in her late 40s, her blonde hair pulled back in a severe bun, her smile tight and artificial. Her eyes flicked from Whitaker to Amara, and a subtle shift occurred in her demeanor, a deference towards him, a coolness towards Amara. "Is there a problem here?" Brenda asked, her voice clipped. "Yes," Whitaker boomed. "This woman is in my seat." Brenda turned to Amara, her smile vanishing completely. "Ma'am, can I see your boarding pass?" The tone wasn't inquisitive, it was accusatory. Amara handed it over, her hand trembling slightly despite her resolve. Brenda glanced at it, then back at Whitaker's pass. For a moment, confusion flickered across her face, quickly replaced by irritation. They both say 2A, Brenda muttered, as if this anomaly were Amara's fault. She looked not at Whitaker, the instigator, but squarely at Amara. Well, someone has to move. There must be a mistake in the system. There's no mistake on my end, Whitaker insisted, puffing out his chest. I booked this seat months ago. Platinum Medallion member. He seemed to expect this title to act as an immediate resolution. Brenda nodded sympathetically at Whitaker. Then, turning back to Amara, her voice hardened. Ma'am, perhaps you could check your reservation again? Sometimes the app glitches. Maybe you were supposed to be in Economy Plus. The implication was clear, insulting. Humiliation, hot and sharp, pricked Amara's eyes. There is no glitch, Amara said, her voice dangerously quiet now. This is my assigned seat. I paid for this seat. I am confirmed in this seat. Please check your manifest. Brenda sighed dramatically, rolling her eyes almost imperceptibly. Look, I don't want to cause a scene. You are causing the scene, Amara retorted, her carefully constructed composure starting to fracture. And so is this gentleman. I am sitting in my assigned seat and I am not moving. Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to lower your voice, Brenda said, her tone becoming openly hostile. You're disturbing the other passengers. Amara looked around. A few faces peered over seatbacks, curious but detached. Others meticulously avoided eye contact, suddenly fascinated by the safety card or the view out the window. The silence of the onlookers felt like a physical weight pressing down on her. They saw. They heard. They did nothing. Their inaction was complicity, a tacit endorsement of the unfolding injustice. I will not lower my voice when I am being wrongly accused and publicly humiliated, Amara stated, her voice resonating with the authority she commanded in her lecture halls. You need to resolve the seating duplication, which is your airline's error, not mine. Check your manifest. Call the gate agent. Whitaker scoffed. Just get her out of here. She's clearly trying to scam her way into first class. The accusation hung in the air, ugly and undeniable. Scam. Because a black woman couldn't possibly belong here legitimately. Brenda seemed to make a decision. She leaned closer to Amara, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. Ma'am, if you continue to be disruptive, I will have to call security. Disruptive? Amara's voice cracked with disbelief and fury. I am sitting quietly in my seat and I am disruptive? Because I refuse to be displaced by this man's entitlement and your prejudice. That's it, Brenda snapped, straightening up. You're causing a disturbance. I need you to gather your belongings and come with me. Absolutely not, Amara said, gripping the armrests. The injustice was suffocating. She thought of the conference, the discussions about microaggressions, implicit bias, the very structures of power that allowed this to happen. And here it was, playing out in real time, textbook perfect. Brenda spoke into the intercom near the galley, her voice falsely calm. Gate agent, I need security at the aircraft door. Passenger disturbance. Panic began to claw at Amara's throat, mingling with the righteous anger. Security? For sitting in her assigned seat? The humiliation was complete. Heads were turned now, whispers exchanged. She felt stripped bare, reduced from Dr. Amara Johnson, respected academic and advocate, to simply disruptive black woman. Near the front of the first-class cabin, in seat 1C, Emily Carter watched, horrified. A 20-year-old journalism major at Northwestern, flying home after visiting her grandparents, she initially hadn't paid much attention. But the escalating tension, the blatant bias in the flight attendant's tone, the sheer unfairness of it, it registered deep in her aspiring journalist's gut. This wasn't just rude, it was wrong. Almost instinctively, she pulled out her phone, angled it discreetly, and pressed record. She captured Brenda's escalating demands, Amara's articulate defense, Whitaker's smugness, and the arrival of 2 uniformed airport security officers. The officers boarded, their presence immediately shifting the atmosphere from tense to menacing. Brenda pointed towards Amara. This passenger is refusing to cooperate and causing a disturbance. One officer, a burly man with a weary expression, addressed Amara. Ma'am, we need you to come with us. His tone was neutral, but the implication was clear. Resistance was futile. Amara looked at their faces, at Brenda's triumphant smirk, at Whitaker settling comfortably into seat 2A as if nothing had happened, at the averted gazes of her fellow passengers. The fight drained out of her, replaced by a bone-deep weariness and a simmering rage. To argue further, to resist physically, would only escalate the situation, potentially leading to arrest, validating their narrative of her being disruptive. She knew how these encounters could twist, how black bodies were perceived as inherently threatening. Trembling, not from fear but from a potent cocktail of fury and humiliation, Amara slowly stood. She retrieved her briefcase and carry-on, her movements stiff, deliberate. Every eye was on her as she walked the length of the first-class cabin, a pariah escorted from the promised land. The security officers walked behind her, a silent, ominous rear guard. As she stepped off the jet bridge and back into the terminal's noise, the sounds hit her like a physical force after the strained silence of the plane. Tears blurred her vision, hot and angry. She swiped them away fiercely. She wouldn't let them see her cry. She found a quiet corner near a deserted gate, her body shaking. Pulling out her phone, her fingers fumbled with the screen. She scrolled through her contacts, landing on a name that represented strength, history, and unwavering support. Reverend Isaiah Porter, civil rights icon, her late father's closest friend, her mentor, her rock. He answered on the second ring, his voice a deep, calming baritone. "Amara, my child. How was the conference? The dam broke." Sobs choked her voice as she recounted the incident, the words tumbling out in a torrent of pain and disbelief. "Kicked me off, Reverend Porter. Like I didn't belong. In front of everyone. They just watched." There was a moment of heavy silence on the line, the kind that preceded thunder. Then Reverend Porter's voice returned, low and resonant, imbued with the righteous anger of decades fighting these same battles. "Amara," he said, his voice vibrating with controlled fury. "You listen to me. This is not just an insult. This is a desecration. Skyhigh Airlines just picked a fight they are not prepared for. Dry your eyes, child. We're about to light a fire under them. A fire they won't be able to put out." Amara gripped the phone, his words a balm to her raw nerves, stoking the embers of her anger into a focused flame. The humiliation still burned, but now something else began to build within her, resolve. This wouldn't end in a quiet corner of the Atlanta airport. This was just the beginning. Chicago, Illinois, and Dallas, Texas, Skyhigh Airlines headquarters. The fire Reverend Porter promised ignited faster than anyone could have anticipated. Emily Carter, shaken by what she'd witnessed, uploaded her discreetly filmed video to Twitter before Flight 1107 even pushed back from the gate. She added a simple, factual caption: "Dr. Amara Johnson, black professor, forced off at Skyhigh Air Flight 1107 from ATL to ORD after white passenger and hostile flight attendant disputed her confirmed first-class seat, 2A. Security called. #flying while black #FirstClassInjustice." By the time Amara, rebooked on a later flight in economy, the only available seat, adding insult to injury, landed in a frigid Chicago night, the video had exploded. #FirstClassInjustice wasn't just trending. It was a digital wildfire consuming timelines across the country. Emily's shaky footage, capturing the raw injustice, Brenda's dismissive tone, Whitaker's smug entitlement, Amara's articulate but ignored defense, the final humiliating escort, struck a nerve. It was a scene depressingly familiar to many black Americans, yet shocking in its blatantness to others. News outlets picked it up immediately. Cable news channels played the clip on loop. Think pieces analyzing the intersection of race, class, and air travel bloomed overnight. Amara's name, previously known primarily in academic and activist circles, was suddenly on millions of lips. In Dallas, Texas, within the sleek, glass and steel headquarters of Skyhigh Airlines, the fallout landed squarely on the polished mahogany desk of CEO Gregory Pembroke. At 52, Pembroke embodied a certain type of corporate success story. White, privileged, handsome in a C-suite sort of way, he had climbed the ladder relentlessly, known for his sharp financial acumen and his ability to streamline operations, often at the expense of softer metrics like employee morale or, frankly, ethical considerations that didn't directly impact the bottom line. His initial reaction to the viral video presented to him by his anxious head of communications, Sarah Chin, was annoyance rather than alarm. Bad optics, he conceded, scrolling through the scathing Twitter comments on his tablet. Another entitled passenger causing trouble and our crew mishandles it. Happens. What's the standard playbook here, Sarah? Standard playbook isn't going to cut it, Greg, Sarah warned, pushing a folder across the desk. This is different. Dr. Johnson is a respected academic and activist. The narrative is firmly against us. We look prejudiced, incompetent, or both. Okay, Gregory sighed, waving a dismissive hand. Draft a statement. Generic apology. We regret the unfortunate incident, thorough investigation, committed to diversity and inclusion. Offer her a travel voucher, maybe some miles. Make it go away. Greg, I don't think, Sarah began, but Pembroke cut her off. Just handle it, Sarah. I have a Q3 earnings call pre-briefing. He saw it as a PR flare-up, a temporary dip in brand sentiment, easily managed with corporate platitudes. He fundamentally didn't get the depth of the anger, the systemic issues the incident tapped into. It was an operational failure, a customer service blunder, not a reflection of a deeper societal wound or a problem within his own company culture. Meanwhile, in Chicago, Amara wasn't waiting for a generic apology. Reverend Porter had connected her with Luis Gutierrez, the sharp, Pulitzer-nominated host of the nationally syndicated news program, The Daily Pulse. That evening, looking poised and powerful despite the lingering trauma, Amara sat opposite Gutierrez under the bright studio lights. She didn't just recount the incident, she contextualized it. She spoke calmly, eloquently, weaving her personal experience into the broader tapestry of systemic racism. This wasn't just about a seat on an airplane, Luis, she explained, her voice steady, compelling. It was about the implicit biases that dictate who is perceived to belong in spaces of privilege and power. It was about the immediate assumption that a black woman in first class must be mistaken, must be interloping, must be challenged. It was about the weaponization of disruption against those who dare to assert their rights. She spoke of the silence of the other passengers, the phenomenon known as the bystander effect, exacerbated by racial dynamics. Their silence wasn't neutral, she asserted. It was a tacit agreement with the narrative being constructed by the flight attendant and Mr. Whitaker that I was the problem. The interview was devastatingly effective. Amara wasn't just a victim, she was a scholar dissecting her own victimization in real time, laying bare the mechanics of everyday racism. Millions watched, shared, and commented. The hashtag gained even more traction. Skyhigh's carefully crafted, bland apology released mid-interview landed with a thud, widely derided as tone-deaf and insufficient. The digital outrage spilled into the physical world. At Chicago O'Hare, a protest erupted near the Skyhigh check-in counters. Leading the chants, megaphone in hand, was Jamal Thompson, a charismatic 17-year-old black high school student and leader of a local youth activist group, Future Forward Chicago. He'd seen Emily's video, then Amara's interview, and felt a familiar fire ignite in his belly. Skyhigh? Tellin' lies? Jamal chanted, his voice ringing through the terminal. No justice? No flights. A diverse crowd of young people, community elders, and allies echoed his call, holding signs demanding accountability, boycotts, and the firing of Brenda Lowell. The protest was peaceful but disruptive, forcing Skyhigh to reroute passengers and drawing even more media attention. Back in Dallas, the pressure was mounting. The stock price had taken a slight hit. Major corporate clients were making concerned inquiries. The generic apology had backfired spectacularly. Gregory Pembroke, however, remained insulated in his executive bubble, frustrated by the persistence of the story but still failing to grasp its significance. Until the confrontation came not from his board or his PR team, but from within his own home. His daughter, Claire, a sophomore at SMU majoring in sociology just like Amara, came home for the weekend, her face tight with anger. She found him in his study reviewing spreadsheets. She didn't knock. Dad, she said, her voice trembling slightly. We need to talk about Skyhigh. About Dr. Johnson. Gregory looked up, surprised by her intensity. Claire, it's being handled. It's a messy peer situation, but a peer situation? Claire interrupted, her voice rising. Dad, did you even watch her interview? Did you see what they did to her? This isn't about optics. This is about racism. The kind of stuff I learn about in class, the kind of stuff Mom tried to tell you about for years. The mention of her mother struck a nerve. Lena, Gregory's ex-wife, a brilliant Haitian-American corporate lawyer, had left him 5 years prior. The official reason was irreconcilable differences, but Claire knew the truth. Lena had grown weary of Gregory's willful blindness, his dismissal of her experiences with microaggressions, his resistance to implementing meaningful diversity initiatives she championed within his previous company. His apathy had been a chasm between them. Your mother, Gregory started defensively. Yes, Mom. Claire pushed on, tears welling in her eyes. She left because you never see people, Dad. You see numbers, profits, problems to be managed. You don't see the human cost. You don't see what it's like for people who don't look like you. For people who look like, well, like Mom. Like me sometimes. Claire was phenotypically white, a fact that often complicated her own understanding of her mixed-race identity, but she carried her mother's legacy and awareness fiercely. Gregory flinched. He adored Claire, but their conversations about race and privilege often left him feeling defensive and inadequate. He wanted to dismiss her concerns as youthful idealism, but her raw emotion, the echo of Lena's long-ignored frustrations, hit him differently this time. This Dr. Johnson, Claire continued, swiping angrily at her tears. She could have been Mom. She could have been Auntie Sylvie. Do you get that? It's not just some random incident. It's happening all the time, and companies like yours enable it. She turned and stormed out of the study, leaving Gregory alone in the heavy silence, the spreadsheets forgotten. Claire's words, "you never see people," echoed in his ears, mixing uncomfortably with Lena's parting shot years ago. "Your ambition has built walls around your empathy, Greg." He felt a prickle of unease, a sense of something fundamentally shifting within him. He walked over to a locked filing cabinet in the corner of his study, a repository for sensitive personnel files and confidential reports. He rarely accessed it himself. He paused, then, on impulse, unlocked it. He knew Sarah Chen's team maintained files on customer complaints, including discrimination claims. He'd never personally reviewed them, delegating such matters to legal and HR. He found the folder easily. It was thicker than he'd expected. Labeled simply discrimination complaints, sensitive, it felt heavy in his hands. He carried it back to his desk, sank into his leather chair, and, for the first time in his tenure as CEO, Gregory Pembroke opened the folder. Inside were stories, letters, emails, internal memos detailing incidents disturbingly similar to Amara's. Passengers of color reporting dismissive treatment, unwarranted scrutiny, wrongful removals. Accusations against specific crew members, including, he noted with a jolt, Brenda Lowell, multiple times. Patterns he had never bothered to look for because he had never truly believed they existed on any significant scale within his airline. The carefully constructed walls around his understanding of his company, and perhaps himself, began to tremble. Claire's tear-streaked face, Lena's remembered warnings, Amara Johnson's dignified fury on the television screen, and the stark, undeniable accounts in the folder before him. They coalesced into a truth he could no longer easily dismiss as bad PR. The eyes of the nation were on Skyhigh, but for the first time, Gregory Pembroke felt like his own eyes were finally, painfully starting to open. The contents of the discrimination folder spread across Gregory Pembroke's desk were more than just complaints. They were ghosts of opportunities missed, warnings ignored. As he read through the accounts, a Sikh man repeatedly questioned about his turban, a Latina mother berated for speaking Spanish to her child, a black veteran denied priority boarding despite his visible disability. The carefully curated narrative of his own success began to fray. His rise hadn't been meteoric, but methodical. A sharp numbers guy from a comfortable, homogeneous suburb in Ohio, Gregory had climbed the corporate ladder through sheer ambition and an uncanny ability to identify inefficiencies. He'd started as a middle manager at a regional airline, quickly distinguishing himself by cutting costs and maximizing routes. Ethics weren't ignored exactly, but they were secondary variables in his profit-driven equations. He learned early to navigate the political currents of the boardroom, mastering the art of the strategic alliance and the timely, calculated risk. He became CEO of Skyhigh 5 years ago, lauded for turning around its flagging profits, celebrated as a decisive leader. Decisive, yes, but discerning? Empathetic? Those weren't qualities prioritized in his ascent. He remembered meetings where diversity initiatives were proposed, often championed by Lena when she still consulted for his previous company. He'd nodded along, approved modest budgets, but saw them primarily as exercises in corporate social responsibility branding, necessary lip service rather than fundamental imperatives. He recalled Lena's growing frustration, her impassioned arguments about the moral and business case for genuine inclusion, arguments he'd privately dismissed as idealistic, perhaps even distracting from the core mission, shareholder value. Lena. Her face swam before his eyes, vibrant, intelligent, perpetually disappointed in his willful obtuseness. She was Haitian American, the daughter of immigrants who had built a successful life through relentless hard work and resilience. She moved through the predominantly white, male spaces of corporate law with a grace and tenacity he admired but never fully understood. She tried to explain the subtle slights, the constant need to prove herself, the exhaustion of navigating spaces where her belonging was perpetually questioned. He'd listened sometimes but hadn't truly heard. He'd minimized her experiences, attributed them to individual bad actors, never connecting the dots to the systemic patterns she described. "It's the apathy, Greg," she'd finally told him the night she packed her bags. Her voice wasn't angry, just weary, resigned. "It's not that you're malicious. It's that you don't care enough to see. You're comfortable in your world and you don't want to be disturbed by the discomfort of others, especially when acknowledging it might require you to change or to challenge the system that benefits you." Her words, which he'd resented at the time, now echoed Claire's accusation. "You never see people." He looked down at the folder again, the weight of his past silence pressing down on him. He had built his success on a foundation that ignored these cracks, these voices, these buried truths. Thousands of miles away, in the vibrant, complicated heart of Memphis, Tennessee, Amara Johnson's understanding of systemic injustice wasn't academic. It was etched into her childhood memories. She grew up in Orange Mound, a historic black neighborhood built by and for African Americans, a community rich in culture and resilience but perpetually grappling with the long shadow of inequality. Her father, Marcus Johnson, was a community leader, a history teacher with a passion for untold stories, a man who believed in the power of education and civic engagement. When Amara was 12, her world fractured. Her father was arrested, accused of embezzling funds from a community development project he spearheaded. The charges felt flimsy, disproportionate, fueled, many whispered, by resentment from city officials uncomfortable with his growing influence and his vocal criticisms of discriminatory housing policies. Amara remembered the confusion, the fear, the shame that clung to her family like a shroud. She remembered her mother, Evelyn, a nurse with quiet strength, working double shifts, holding their family together, navigating the labyrinthine legal system with fierce determination. She remembered the whispers at school, the sudden coolness from neighbors, the feeling of being marked. Her father spent nearly 2 years tangled in legal battles, his savings depleted, his reputation tarnished. He was eventually acquitted on appeal, the evidence deemed insufficient, whispers of planted evidence never fully substantiated but lingering nonetheless. But the experience left an indelible mark. He emerged quieter, wary, the fire in his eyes dimmed, though his love for his daughter and his community never wavered. Amara saw firsthand how easily black lives could be derailed, how institutions could be weaponized, how innocence was a privilege often not afforded to people who looked like her father. That experience ignited Amara's own activism. In high school, when a history teacher dismissively allocated only a single class period to Black History Month, calling it sufficient coverage of a niche topic, a teenage Amara didn't just complain. She organized. Drawing on her father's lessons about collective action and her mother's quiet resilience, she rallied fellow Black students and their allies. They researched, prepared presentations, drafted demands for a more inclusive curriculum. When the administration brushed them off, Amara led a school-wide walkout. Hundreds of students marched out of class, gathering peacefully in the schoolyard, holding handmade signs. It was her first taste of collective power, the intoxicating, terrifying thrill of challenging authority for a just cause. The administration was forced to listen. While the changes weren't revolutionary, they were concessions, a dedicated assembly, promises of curriculum review. More importantly, Amara learned the power of her own voice, the necessity of disruption in the face of complacency. Her path to becoming a sociologist specializing in systemic racism felt less like a choice and more like a calling, forged in the crucible of her family's experience and her early activism. She carried the weight of her father's ordeal, her mother's quiet strength, and the resilience of her Memphis community into her work. Now, reeling from the Skyhigh incident, the parallels felt stark. The dismissive flight attendant, the entitled passenger, the silent bystanders, they were all cogs in the same machine that had tried to crush her father, the same system that minimized Black history. The same apathy Lena had fought against in Gregory Pembroke's world. She spoke again with Reverend Porter, his voice a grounding force amidst the media storm and the flood of messages, supportive, hateful, and everything in between. They want to make this about one rude flight attendant, Amara, Reverend Porter cautioned, his voice rumbling with wisdom earned through decades on the front lines. They'll try to isolate the incident, offer you hush money disguised as compensation. Don't let them. I won't, Rev, Amara assured him, pacing her small Chicago apartment, the city lights glittering coldly outside her window. But it's exhausting. Reliving it for every interview, dealing with the trolls online. I know, child. The burden is heavy. But remember what your father taught you, what we learned marching shoulder to shoulder with Dr. King. Silence is complicity. Your voice, right now, it's cracking walls they didn't even know they built around themselves. Walls of ignorance, of apathy, of willful blindness. Keep speaking your truth. Not just for you, but for all the others whose stories are buried in folders like the one that CEO is probably staring at right now, wondering how it got so thick. His words resonated deeply. Her voice. It was the tool she had honed, the weapon she wielded in lecture halls and at conferences. Now it was being tested on a national stage. The weight of silence, her father's forced silence, the passenger's chosen silence, Gregory Pembroke's long-held corporate silence, felt immense. But her voice, amplified by the outrage of countless others, felt stronger. It was a legacy, an obligation, a force capable of demanding not just an apology, but true accountability. The walkout in Memphis, her father's fight for exoneration, Lena Pembroke's lonely battles in boardrooms, they were all part of the same long, arduous struggle. And Amara knew with bone-deep certainty that she could not afford to be silent now. The pressure cooker environment at Skyhigh headquarters intensified. The protests continued, albeit smaller, more targeted. Hashtag Boycott Skyhigh gained traction among influential organizations. The board was getting restless, demanding more than platitudes. Sarah Chin, the communications head, bluntly told Gregory, "Your personal silence is becoming deafening. People need to hear from you." But it was Reverend Porter's intervention that finally broke the corporate impasse. Leveraging his considerable moral authority and network, he reached out directly to Gregory Pembroke's office, not with threats, but with a calm, firm request, a private meeting between Gregory and Dr. Amara Johnson. No lawyers, no PR handlers, just a conversation. Gregory hesitated. His instinct was to manage this through official channels, shielded by legal counsel. But Claire's words, Lena's memory, and the haunting stories from the discrimination folder gnawed at him. Perhaps direct engagement was the only path forward. He agreed. Reverend Porter facilitated the arrangements. A neutral location was chosen, a quiet, private room at a respected nonprofit mediation center in Chicago. Amara felt a knot of apprehension tighten in her stomach as she walked into the room. Facing the man whose company had allowed her humiliation felt daunting, draining. But Reverend Porter's words echoed, "Your voice cracks walls." She took a deep breath, smoothed her blazer, and reminded herself she wasn't there just for herself. She carried the weight of the stories in that folder, the countless unreported incidents, the legacy of her father's struggle. Gregory Pembroke stood awkwardly as she entered, extending a hesitant hand. "Dr. Johnson, thank you for agreeing to meet." His usual corporate confidence seemed diminished, replaced by an uncomfortable uncertainty. Amara shook his hand firmly, meeting his gaze directly. "Mr. Pembroke." They sat opposite each other at a simple table. A carafe of coffee and water sat untouched between them. The silence stretched for a moment, thick with unspoken tension. Gregory cleared his throat. "Dr. Johnson, I want to begin by offering my profound and personal apology for what you experienced on Flight 1107. It was unacceptable. It was appalling. And I am deeply sorry." The words sounded rehearsed, yet tinged with a nascent sincerity Amara hadn't expected. "I appreciate the sentiment, Mr. Pembroke," Amara replied coolly. "But an apology, however sincere, doesn't erase the experience. Nor does it address the systemic issues within Skyhigh that allowed it to happen." "I understand," Gregory said quickly, perhaps too quickly. "And we are taking steps. The flight attendant, Brenda Lowell, has been suspended pending a full investigation. We are reviewing our training protocols." Amara held up a hand, cutting him off gently but firmly. "Mr. Pembroke, with all due respect, this isn't just about Brenda Lowell or inadequate training modules. This is about a culture that allows bias, conscious or unconscious, to dictate how passengers are treated, who is believed, who is deemed worthy of respect." She leaned forward, her voice dropping slightly but gaining intensity. "Do you know how many black travelers, how many people of color, brace themselves every time they approach an airport counter, a security line, a boarding gate? We anticipate the extra scrutiny, the dismissive tone, the possibility of being challenged or questioned in ways our white counterparts rarely face. What happened to me wasn't an anomaly. It was a manifestation of a pervasive reality." She began to share stories, not just her own, but anonymized accounts gleaned from her own network and research since the incident, stories that echoed those Gregory had found in his folder. She spoke of Dr. Evans, a decorated Army veteran with a prosthetic leg who was denied pre-boarding by a Skyhigh agent despite his visible disability and documentation told he didn't look disabled enough. She mentioned Maria Rodriguez, flying with her elderly mother, humiliated when a flight attendant loudly reprimanded her for speaking Spanish, telling her to speak American. She recounted the experience of Jamal Thompson's older cousin, detained and questioned by security after being mistakenly identified as suspicious while waiting for his luggage. "These aren't just customer service issues, Mr. Pembroke," Amara stated, her eyes locking onto his. "They are patterns of discrimination. They are the result of biases embedded within your systems, your training, and yes, likely within your workforce." Brenda Lowell didn't act in a vacuum. She acted within a culture that implicitly, if not explicitly, validated her assumptions about me. Gregory listened, his face paling slightly. He shifted uncomfortably in his seat. The stories weren't abstract complaints in a file anymore, they were vivid, human accounts of pain and degradation delivered by the compelling voice of a woman his company had deeply wronged. He thought of Claire. He remembered a painful incident from her middle school years, one he'd tried to forget. She had come home in tears after a classmate, during an argument, had called her a racial slur related to her mother's Haitian heritage. Gregory had been furious, had called the school, demanded consequences. He had felt protective, outraged on her behalf. But Lena had pointed out something crucial then, something he hadn't wanted to hear. You're angry because your daughter was hurt, Greg. But are you angry about the racism itself? Do you fight it when it doesn't affect you directly? The memory surfaced now with startling clarity. He looked at Amara, seeing not just an aggrieved passenger or a PR problem, but a person who carried the cumulative weight of countless slights, whose dignity had been assaulted. And he saw his own complicity, his own failure to truly see beyond his privileged perspective. A choked sound escaped him. He put his head in his hands for a moment, his composure finally cracking. When he looked up, his eyes were glistening with unshed tears. My daughter, he began, his voice thick with emotion. Years ago, she experienced something. A slur. It was ugly. I was angry. But I didn't connect it. I didn't see how pervasive it was. How connects to this? He gestured helplessly around the room. I didn't protect my own child from the reality of it, not really. I just got angry at the one incident. I didn't understand the source. He took a shaky breath. I see now. I've spent years looking at spreadsheets, optimizing routes, and I never truly looked at the human impact. At the cost, the admission hung in the air, raw and unexpected. Amara watched him, her expression softening slightly. This wasn't the performance of a CEO trying to salvage his brand. This felt like the painful awakening of a man confronting his own blind spots. Seeing is the first step, Mr. Pembroke, Amara said quietly but firmly. But it's not enough. Change isn't a press release announcing an investigation. It's not a few mandatory training sessions that people click through without engaging. It requires deep, structural shifts. It requires accountability, transparency, and a genuine commitment to embedding equity into the DNA of Skyhigh. She pushed a neatly typed proposal across the table. I've outlined some thoughts. Concrete actions. Beyond firing one employee, Gregory picked it up, his hands still trembling slightly. He scanned the points: mandatory, ongoing anti-bias and cultural competency training developed with external experts, the creation of an independent civilian oversight board with diverse representation to review discrimination complaints, transparent reporting of diversity metrics and complaint resolutions, investment in pipeline programs to increase diversity among pilots, flight crews, and management, a reparations fund managed independently to compensate victims of past discrimination. Documented in Skyhigh's own files, the scope was far beyond anything his team had contemplated. It required relinquishing some corporate control, significant financial investment, and a public admission of systemic failure. It was daunting. It was necessary. Gregory swallowed. This is substantial. Systemic problems require systemic solutions, Amara stated simply. Are you willing to do the work? Are you willing to use your power not just to apologize, but to actively dismantle the structures within your own company that perpetuate harm? Gregory looked from the proposal to Amara's unwavering gaze. He thought of Claire, of Lena, of the faces conjured by the stories in the folder and the ones Amara had just shared. He thought of the weight of his past silence. Yes, he said, his voice gaining a measure of conviction Amara hadn't heard before. Yes, we have failed. I have failed. We will do this. The next day, Gregory Pembroke didn't issue another written statement. He stood before cameras for a live-streamed press conference, not from the safety of his office, but from a Skyhigh training facility hangar. His PR team looked nervous. Sarah Chin gave him a questioning look, reminding him they'd prepped remarks. He shook his head slightly. He stepped up to the podium, the lights harsh, the silence expectant. He looked directly into the main camera, addressing not just the reporters, but the employees, the passengers, the public watching online. Good morning, he began, his voice unsteady at first. Yesterday, I had a conversation that changed my perspective. A conversation with Dr. Amara Johnson. He paused, taking a deep breath. For too long, Skyhigh Airlines, under my leadership, has focused on metrics that don't tell the whole story. We've celebrated profits while ignoring pain. We measured efficiency but not equity. He recounted, briefly and humbly, the incident involving Dr. Johnson, acknowledging the company's failures at multiple levels. Then his voice broke. Tears welled in his eyes and streamed, unashamedly, down his face. "We failed Dr. Johnson," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "And in failing her, we revealed deeper failures within our own organization. Failures documented in our own files, stories I hadn't taken the time to truly see until now. We have failed countless other passengers, particularly passengers of color, who deserved safety, respect, and dignity and received suspicion and humiliation instead." He wiped his eyes, composing himself. "An apology is not enough. Words are not enough. Today, Skyhigh Airlines commits to accountability. Real, measurable accountability." He then outlined the key points from Amara's proposal: the mandatory, rigorously developed anti-bias training for all employees, from the boardroom to the baggage handlers, the establishment of the independent civilian oversight board, the commitment to transparency in reporting, the investment in diversity pipeline programs, and the creation of the reparations fund for past victims. He announced Brenda Lowell's termination, citing not just the incident with Dr. Johnson but a documented pattern of biased behavior. He acknowledged this was just the beginning, a long-term commitment, not a quick fix. "We have a lot of work to do," he concluded, his gaze steady now, imbued with a newfound, albeit fragile, resolve. "We have to earn back trust. We have to fundamentally change our culture. It will be uncomfortable. It will be difficult, but it is the only way forward. We are cleared for takeoff on a different kind of journey now, one towards justice and equity." The live stream ended. The room was silent for a beat, then erupted in questions from reporters. Online, the reaction was swift and varied: skepticism from some, cautious optimism from others, but widespread acknowledgement that this was different. This wasn't a generic corporate statement. It was a raw, personal admission of failure coupled with concrete, systemic commitments. Amara watched the live stream from her apartment, Reverend Porter on the phone line. There were no triumphant cheers, just a quiet acknowledgement of a significant shift. "He cried," Amara murmured, surprised. "Tears can cleanse, Amara," Reverend Porter said softly. "But the real test isn't the waterworks. It's the groundwork that follows. He's laid the plan. Now we see if he builds the house." The turbulence had been severe, shaking the foundations of Skyhigh and Gregory Pembroke's world. But through the storm, a path toward truth, however difficult, had emerged. 1 year later, Skyhigh Airlines and beyond. The year following Gregory Pembroke's tearful apology and commitment to change was one of quiet, relentless work, marked by progress and inevitable friction. True to his word, Skyhigh Airlines didn't just issue directives. It began the arduous process of cultural transformation. The most visible partnership was with Dr. Amara Johnson's newly established nonprofit, Equity in the Skies. Funded initially by a substantial seed grant from Skyhigh, part of the reparations commitment, the organization's first major project was co-developing and implementing the airline's mandatory anti-bias training. Amara, drawing on her sociological expertise and network of diversity, equity, and inclusion (DI) specialists, insisted it be more than a one-off webinar. It became an ongoing program involving interactive workshops, scenario-based learning, and facilitated discussions designed to unearth unconscious biases and promote cultural competency. Resistance surfaced, of course. Some veteran employees grumbled about political correctness or felt unfairly targeted. Anonymous comments on internal forums occasionally turned hostile. But Gregory, guided by Amara and the newly formed Civilian Oversight Board, a diverse group including former judges, community activists, including a representative from Jamal Thompson's youth group, and aviation experts, held the line. Participation wasn't optional, and feedback, both positive and negative, was actively solicited and used to refine the program. Performance reviews began incorporating metrics related to inclusive behavior. The Oversight Board also started its work reviewing past and present discrimination complaints, establishing clearer, more transparent procedures, and ensuring passengers had a direct line to independent recourse. The Reparations Fund, administered by a third-party foundation, began quietly compensating individuals whose claims, previously dismissed or ignored, were validated by the review process. It was a quiet act of restorative justice, acknowledging past harms without fanfare. Skyhigh also invested significantly in pipeline programs, partnering with HBCUs and community colleges to create scholarships and mentorship opportunities for minority students pursuing careers in aviation pilots, mechanics, air traffic controllers, and corporate roles. The goal was long-term structural change, diversifying the overwhelmingly white and male industry from the ground up. Brenda Lowell, the flight attendant whose actions ignited the firestorm, sued Skyhigh for wrongful dismissal, claiming she was made a scapegoat. However, discovery during the lawsuit brought her documented history of passenger complaints and biased behavior to light. Coupled with testimony about the new, rigorously implemented standards of conduct and the evidence from Emily Carter's video, her case was dismissed. Accountability, it turned out, had teeth. Emily Carter, meanwhile, had leveraged her viral video and subsequent reporting into a prestigious internship at the Daily Pulse, working directly with Luis Gutierrez. She was now producing a multi-part series chronicling the Equity in the Skies movement, exploring how one incident sparked broader conversations about racial profiling and consumer rights across the travel industry. Her journalistic instincts, honed by the experience, were sharp, her commitment to amplifying marginalized voices unwavering. Jamal Thompson, the young activist from Chicago, hadn't stopped organizing. Inspired by the impact of the Skyhigh protests, he co-founded a national youth coalition focused on combating racial profiling in transportation and public spaces. They lobbied for policy changes, ran social media awareness campaigns, and provided support for young people facing discrimination, proving that activism wasn't just for seasoned figures like Reverend Porter, but a vital force driven by the next generation. Gregory Pembroke was, by his own admission, still learning. The journey was far from over. He stumbled sometimes, reverted to old habits of thought, and faced pushback from factions within his own company resistant to change. But he kept showing up. He regularly met with the oversight board, listened intently during DEI sessions, and championed the new initiatives publicly and privately. He developed a tentative, respectful working relationship with Amara, often seeking her candid feedback. His relationship with Claire had improved, marked by a new humility on his part and a cautious pride on hers. He even reconnected with Lena, not romantically, but finding a measure of reconciliation built on his acknowledged growth. 16 months after the incident in Atlanta, Gregory shared a stage with Amara at the National Justice Summit in Washington, D.C. It wasn't a victory lap, but a progress report. He spoke about the challenges, the ongoing work, the imperative for corporate leaders to embrace accountability not as a burden, but as an opportunity. He quoted Maya Angelou, a passage Amara had shared with him, "Do the best you can until you know better. Then when you know better, do better." We didn't know better, Gregory admitted to the audience. Or perhaps we chose not to know. Now we are striving, imperfectly but persistently, to do better. The story closes not with a neat resolution, but on another airplane. Dr. Amara Johnson is boarding a Skyhigh flight from Chicago to attend a conference, this time one focused on restorative justice practices in corporate settings. She walks down the jet bridge, the familiar hum of the airport surrounding her. As she steps onto the plane, she's greeted not with suspicion or hostility, but with a warm, genuine smile from a black flight attendant named Denise. "Welcome aboard, Dr. Johnson," Denise says, her eyes crinkling with recognition. "Seat 2A, window?" "Yes, thank you, Denise," Amara replies, a small smile touching her own lips. The interaction is simple, professional, unremarkable. And in its very ordinariness lies the progress. That's how it should have been all along. She settles into seat 2A, the same seat that had been the site of her humiliation. She glances out the window as the plane taxis away from the gate. It doesn't feel like a final destination, but rather a point of departure. The runway stretches ahead, long and clear, a symbol of the journey still unfolding. Pulling out her phone, Amara types a quick text message. Not to Reverend Porter this time, but to Claire Pembroke. "Just boarded Skyhigh. Smooth sailing so far. Your dad's trying. Keep pushing him." She adds a smiling emoji, hits send, and puts her phone away as the plane accelerates, lifting off the ground and into the vast, open sky. The ascent is smooth, promising. The work, she knows, continues on the ground and in the air, in boardrooms and community centers, in hearts and in institutions. The runway stretches onward, towards a horizon still distant, but perhaps, finally, within sight.